the Institute of Voluntary Action Research. They have 8 flexible funder commitments, which some of you may have signed up to already, but it's more just ensuring that these are considered throughout, and really evaluation and learning is no exception. So over the next sort of hour or so, you will hear from both myself and Maddie just talking a bit more about how these commitments sort of align and resonate with, the slides we go through. Grantees, they're going to want to be able to be part of building the evidence base and sort of looking at the, how to sort of shift strategy, funding or policy. But they need to sort of feel part of that partnership, and really, these commitments are really sort of helping everybody to really just rethink about the part they play, but also just ensuring that everything is focused, like laser focused, and also that it's sort of it's aligned to everything that's being done and the right questions are being asked at the right point. So it was really about that sort of flexible working, about that proportionality, as well as we'll sort of talk a bit more about as we go through the slides. But the next slide would be great, please, Maddie. So I think just in the introduction, it's probably useful just to run through that there are, all sorts of different sort of ways of evaluating things, but there really are sort of 3 main areas, and whoever you talk to, they probably will cut across these 3. So really, the order of these, do sort of change, but we're talking about an impact evaluation. Impact evaluation is about understanding the difference that was made by delivering that particular program or fund. This needs to really take into account what might have happened anyway, and it can be quite challenging to really sort of quantify and understand about what the difference was for this particular program. An example may be that if you're funding a project to support individuals to sort of support their confidence, then how much of that can you really attribute to this program versus something that may have happened if the program never existed? So it's quite difficult to really work that through, but really, the tools behind it try to discount things to try to give you a real sort of idea of what that looks like. As you then sort of come into the economic evaluation, that's really understanding the wider benefits and also the costs for society. So some of you may have heard of CBA, so that's the cost benefit analysis, and really that is a method that helps you sort of really work through the organizations to really assess the feasibility of this and understand what that economic value really is. And then lastly, we've then talking about process evaluation. So this is probably an area that I really enjoy. Actually, it's about sort of understanding how a program was delivered and reviewing all those sort of areas, all those processes across the strengths, the learning, the development, to help inform future practices. So normally that would entail working across a range of different stakeholders, sort of internal and external. It would also involve focus groups and really looking at a whole end to end. So it's about understanding what's working really well and what areas could you develop further, and then that feeds right back into future redesign. So monitoring, really what we're trying to sort of show here, so the next slide, Maddie, that's just the title, that's it. So what we're trying to say here really is that it's not monitoring, it's not about ticking boxes, it's about trying to help you to learn, to think about the future development, future strategy. So it's not about, have they completed their monitoring form? Great, it's in, we can release a payment. It's about, okay, what are they really telling us? What's the story behind it? And some of it will be monitoring data, and some of it will be understanding, the outputs, outcomes, and even, the learning, the insights that are being provided. So what it's helping you to understand is about who you are reaching. So it helps you to understand, the demographics of perhaps the end users. It's looking at the particular gaps there may be, which could inform future priorities, and also about the outcomes. What outcomes are being reached? Is there a certain number that are reaching the majority of, perhaps a couple of your outcomes, and the others are perhaps not really sort of being reached at all, and therefore you may be thinking about what that means for the future as well. And is there a reason why they're not reaching those outcomes? Is it because they're just not, there's no real need for them, or is it about they're actually, it's not targeted the right organizations? So it's about looking at identifying those gaps, and the data really, it should be used. It's not about sort of trying to ask people to answer questions which you may be asked and may not be asked. It's about trying to be really specific about the data and ensuring that it's a partnership with the grantees, so they're helping to inform those future strategies. And if they understand that, then they buy into the process, and that's what you're trying to do, is sort of make sure it's more of a partnership approach. Okay, next slide, Maddie. So the decisions that really the data is going to help you make. So the first one is about, if you can have a clear purpose, then that will help you to review what you need to ask, and also help you to really understand, about the data that you're being, the questions you're asking organizations to complete. Sometimes it's about a bit of layering, that you may be adding additional questions in, but are you removing some that perhaps have been there all the time and maybe they're not being used? So it's not just about layering, it's about really understanding the purpose of what you're asking, why you're asking it, and how it's being used. Avoiding keeping data just in case. So sometimes, particularly if you're from like a local authority, you may think, actually, I might get a question on this and I'll collect this data anyway. And it may be, like a 1% chance it's going to be asked. So what we would say is really just focus on the information you really need and how it's going to really inform your future learning. Those things that are probably may be asked, there's probably lots of those sort of things, and you can't really foresee or guess what they're going to be. So I think it is a case of just trying to sort of feel you can't ask for everything, and it needs to be meaningful. Yeah, coming on to the next bit is about making sure that monitoring is used, it's manageable, it has purpose. And by designing it early on, it sort of then means that you're then saving time, you're saving that sort of additional burden, and the revisions and additional questions and confusion that might have happened later on, because if you're realizing you've not asked specific questions, or you're having to go back and be a bit more clearer about what it is that you're asking, it can cause confusion with grantees. So it's about really being crystal clear, really, what you're asking. Okay, and with the next slide here, so we're talking really about ensuring that monitoring aligns. It's about proportionality. It's about making sure it aligns to the size of the grant you're making. It's about the complexity of the grant and the monitoring, and also the risk of the grant. So just ensuring that you're not making like I don't know, like a £2,000 grant and you're asking about 20 questions. It's not really going to work. And sometimes it's about, well, is it worth applying for a grant of that value when you've got all of this additional sort of monitoring and learning that you're going through? So there's something about how often you're asking for that. And if you are making a small grant, it's probably just at the end of the process that you would ask for a form. Those that are larger, you would then sort of have more detail. It'll probably be quarterly, 6 monthly, where you'll be asking for more detail about the demographic data, about the alignment to outcomes, and the learning as well. Small grants, you probably just have 5 or 6 questions potentially. So it's about trying to make sure you're asking the right questions. It's really specific and it feels relevant to the organisations as well. And trying to think about not layering. It's about how you can really work with the grantees, so you're not asking for all these additional questions and forms and systems. It's about how you can add to existing structures within those grantees. So they probably already have systems in place. Unless they're volunteer led and small, they're probably likely to have some sort of monitoring evaluation process. So how can you work with them to get what you need? And also about, again, going back to that proportionality, about you have better quality data when everybody's clear, everybody sort of understands what the ask is and what you're asking of the organizations and what they're doing. Otherwise, I think it's about how real is the data, and is it, and it's not that it's being fiddled, but sometimes they may not really understand. And if you're asking for demographic breakdowns, it may be they're just taking some percentage and working out a figure rather than actually asking the individuals themselves. So it's about making sure that everything that's being provided has a purpose and it's very clear. Um, and that sort of lends itself really to what we're talking about here with co-designing. So grantees and potential charities working together. So by taking that partnership approach, which is going back to the IVAR principles, you're ensuring, therefore, the indicators are appropriate, they feel relevant. You can understand what the distance travelled is between the pre-grant and post-grant, and also those expectations are aligned. They bought into that, they understand what it is that you're asking. It's also realistic. you're not sort of layering things on which sort of feel like, I'm not sure how we're going to get this information. It's about, it's being really clear with them to understand what that looks like. And it's about ensuring that the data can be collected. They've got buy-in from you as a funder, and also sort of understanding what that change really is and what that process looks like and the part that they're playing in the system. So when they're sort of providing you the information, it's about also perhaps sharing with them reports at the end of that to sort of understand how their data really helped, and what those perhaps differences or changes are going to be. But also, making sure that you're looking at it from different perspectives. It's about, that robustness of the data that's being collected. And, it's obviously going to come from the individuals themselves in some cases where you are going through some evaluation work, but equally, you've got internal processes here within the actual organizations as well.
Thanks for that, Michael.
Yeah. I think it's over to you, I think.
Yeah, it is. Thanks. Yes, now just going to talk through sort of social return on investment. But just before we go there, I just wanted to sort of come back to this kind of co-design point, because it really drives into the social return on investment as well. What we found in a lot of the work that we do on sort of evaluating grant and funds is, if you can get people involved in this beginning stage, they're actually much more likely to collect and send the data on time as well, because they understand it more, they feel like they've had a say within it, and it doesn't feel like it's been done to them. And often that can be just quite a challenge, if they're negotiating many funding pots, the one that they feel they've shaped a little bit more, they're much more likely to kind of prioritize their data collection as well. So you really do get much better data coming back. And that's particularly important when we look at social return on investment. So I'm sure you'll have heard of this term by now. It's increasingly sort of popular within the UK sort of funding sector at the moment. But basically, it's a social return on investment. So we used to just think of a return on investment. So if I put this many pounds in, how much do I get back as an organisation? But now what we're doing is thinking, well, actually, how much does society get back? Because it's not just going to have a sort of immediate impact for one organisation, for example, a local authority. It's also going to have impacts for health boards, for third sector organisations, and for business often as well, particularly where things are hitting sort of employability or health. So effectively, a social return on investment then is a framework. It's various frameworks. There are different kind of tools and approaches you can do for this. So you might have heard of HACT, H-A-C-T, or the social value engine. There's lots of different ones. We use all of them and none of them, and all sort of in between. Greater Manchester Authority has sort of done some calculations and modelling around this as well. And there's lots and lots of different ways. We don't want to say which one's better or worse, because they all have different sort of uses. But the idea is just to understand that it is a framework. It's not a final answer, and all of them are just effectively sort of best guesses and estimates. And it might be the case that nobody yet has done the legwork behind an outcome that you want, and therefore there might not yet be a social value ascribed. But effectively what this does is the same as a return on investment. It produces a ratio. So if I say I've spent, for every pound I get £3 back, that kind of means that this is a good return on investment, but it's not just for my organisation, it's going to be for the sort of the wider society. A social return on investment also then tells the story of the value, because you don't tend to just stop with £3 for every pound invested. You would start listing out the different types of values that might be. So again, going back to an example of employability, you might have developed a fund that improves kind of employability training of people, thinking of the UK Trailblazers at the moment, for example. And it could be that some of this return is people claiming fewer benefits. It could be some of this return is increased productivity for businesses. Some of it will be sort of differences in people using mental health and kind of counselling services. Whatever it might be, there's going to be different ways that this value is spread out, and a social return on investment can help you sort of tell that story. What it does, however, though, is requires quite a lot of assumptions, and it's definitely not a sort of magical science that works amazingly every time. There's always going to be those assumptions and estimations, and it's about making sure that you can be transparent about that, transparent about the limitations, and also understand, as Michael was saying earlier, where you might have just been contributing rather than fully leading to a change as well. So again, there'll be other things going on, so it's just kind of being careful. And really what we want to say here is they're really, really useful tools, and funders in particular like to see them. You know, people like to know where their money's going, that they're getting a good return on it. But we are always cautious of putting sort of too much stock into it, because it's, as I say, it is a little bit messy, and it is based on sort of lots of different proxies and things like that. So it's kind of one of those things that it's really useful and it can show you where value is, but it should be alongside other metrics. You also need to collect quite a bit of data to do it well. So back to Michael's point earlier, if this is just a £2,000 fund, it's small, you know, someone's just using it maybe to create a welcome space, you're probably not going to be asking the fundees to collect additional information for this, and instead you might want to do that yourself kind of via a proxy. So there are times when it is and isn't useful, and really what you need to think about is, are you using this just because you want that big high level number of your £3 back for every pound invested, or is there sort of some additional value that you can get there? And again, is it going to be too burdensome, or is it actually proportionate? So the bigger your fund, the more likely is that you'll be taking this as an approach. It's not useful if your monitoring data is limited or inconsistent. So if you do what Michael said at the beginning and make sure you set up your monitoring very, very well, then you really, really open up the possibility for getting a usable and sort of high quality SROI. If your outcomes are really hard to monetize meaningfully, then that's going to be difficult. So if we go back to employability, there is lots and lots and lots of work done on sort of monetizing the value of getting people onto a training course, improving their skills, into volunteering, into actual work. There is so many metrics and things you can use. It becomes a lot woollier if we're thinking about social isolation forever. There are obvious benefits to it, but trying to monetize the value of spending more time with people becomes a lot more difficult. So it really just depends there on what the outcomes are that you're focusing on. As I've said, if it's quite small, it probably isn't. It's probably going to be disproportionate. And if the assumptions kind of outweigh the strength of the available evidence, so basically if you're making more guesses than you are putting in data, then again, you're probably just not getting a real sort of usable or realistic number. And again, I think also really important to consider, because, you know, time, money, resources is all limited. If the cost and the effort of getting an SROI is beyond the insights gained, then there's no point in sort of going down that. And instead, you might want to focus on some of the other areas that we'll talk through later on today, such as the process learning, which can help you build in efficiencies, make things run a bit more smoothly, and then maybe in a couple of years, you want to return to the SROI. However, there are some times when it's absolutely fantastic to use. This is particularly when a financial lens is going to help make a strategic case for investment. So if it's the case that you're wanting to lobby an organisation sort of external or kind of above, so particularly the UK government, there may actually be a lot more credence put behind evidence that has that monetary value. Money talks, we all know this. And if we can say that, you know what, this approach gives you £5 for every pound spent, and this one that we're currently doing just gives us 2, that could be the justification to move funding and to move efforts towards the higher return. So it's really about demonstrating then the value to boards, commissioners, partners, and also to sort of users. So again, if you're a local authority or a regional authority, you have residents that sit within your area, and if you can go to them, you know, your council tax, you paid us £1 and we've developed £4 worth of value, that can be a good sort of messaging and a good political tool to use as well. When the outcomes are really well evidenced and understood, again, it can be particularly useful, and then it becomes a lot less effort to do. What can also be really useful, and we've done this with a few projects, is where there's lots of different activities going on, particularly if something's a pilot, it's quite a new or innovative idea. If you can start looking at the social return of investment of different activities, you can quite quickly go, oh, okay, these 5 activities all work, they're all leading to these outcomes, but this one here gives us the biggest return on investment, and therefore moving forwards, let's put more money towards this because we will get bigger outcomes and impacts from it. So it can help sort of tailoring where effort should be. And like we say, where that monitoring data is already strong, it's always going to work the best. So it really is just making sure it's thought about early on. Michael said, think about your monitoring data early on. Think about whether or not you want to do a social return on investment early on too, because it may mean actually that you definitely have to collect 1 or 2 data points that otherwise might have been more just in case. If you're going to do the SROI, that could kind of upgrade them almost to being needed, in which case that's fine, definitely do it. But if you think about that too late in the game, you've lost the opportunity to collect the data, and then your data is not going to be good enough to make it worthwhile. So it's just really making sure that you do that and have these kind of considerations early on. And again, can be something that's co-designed with sort of potential grantees. If you have a sort of session with them, asking what types of data they collect, knowing what types of data might give you enough information for an SROI, and then trying to match up whether it's going to be possible based on their current resources can be really helpful. So that's kind of the quantitative side, all the numbers. Hopefully, as everyone's aware, though, when we evaluate things, yes, we need to know the numbers, we need to know the reach, we need to know the extent to which things have happened, but it's also really, really important to actually speak to people and get the qualitative insights around what's been happening as well. And this is particularly important, as we'll move on to in a few minutes, to help craft stories. But it's also really important because numbers sort of tell us how much, but people tell us why. And you can't really get the why from the numbers. So if you just want to know this has led to X change, that's great. But if you want to understand why it's led to X change, then you really need to start speaking to people. So qualitative data and peer research then. Qualitative data, as hopefully you know, is just anything that is about sort of engaging with people when you're not just getting numbers or yes, no answers. So it's open-ended questions. It can be words, it can also be visuals. You can get people to draw things, they can draw journeys, they can sketch out, they can use photography and take pictures of the local area, maybe if you're looking at changing a place. You can go and observe things. Maybe it's that you're doing your funded training sessions, and you can go along and observe how people are engaging with them. It's basically anything that's not a number can be classed as kind of qualitative data. The idea is that you're getting people's feelings and perceptions, their experience and their personal stories. So again, it's really diving into the kind of the why behind things. And as we've sort of mentioned a few times, traditionally qualitative data is sort of done researcher to researched. So as I say, I'm the head of research. We do lots of work here where we're evaluating a grant fund and we go and speak to the users. Say if it's a health project, we're speaking to the kind of patients or clients of what it is. But sometimes, I'm an external person. They might not know who I am. They might not really have some trust with me. And what you can do instead is train up sort of peer researchers to go and do that data collection as well. And often that can help you get a sort of wider selection of voices and perhaps more honest voices. And again, peer research is really good because you can actually give people that are doing the research additional skills. So particularly where you are working in that employability sector, upskilling people, you're already ticking off some of your outcomes yourself kind of by doing that. So it can become a really sort of mutually beneficial approach. Absolutely not to say that research from a researcher, sort of more professional one, is not good. It's obviously often a sort of cheaper and sort of quicker way to do it, but it really just depends on what level of sort of insight you want to get from the people that you engage in there. But the real sort of value then behind the qualitative data is you explain the meaning, you give context to that monitoring data as well. You might highlight new themes that you've not been collecting. So Michael said you're thinking about those outcomes really early on, but sometimes, particularly where it's a really new project, and I know there's some people in the room that have got sort of brand new areas of work that haven't had funding in their local area or even on a national area before. There's no evidence. You're not going to be able to guess and preempt every single possible outcome. So the first time you do it, you do that qualitative data in depth, very in depth and sort of detailed. Whatever comes out of that, the next round, you could then add in a couple of extra monitoring points around outcomes that you hadn't initially thought of. So it can be really helpful to kind of bring out the unintended or the uncovered outcomes as well. It also just gives people the opportunity to communicate in more human ways. People get survey fatigue, or you don't want to be just a number or just a sort of set of demographic data. And it's nice for people to be able to sort of share their stories in ways that reflects their own kind of personal preferences. And then, like I say as well, that peer research approach can really mitigate power imbalances and resource concerns as well. So the assumption is that you've set up your monitoring, you've considered whether or not you want to do your social return on investment, you've got something set up to do your qualitative data collection, whether that's having sort of researchers do it or developing a peer research approach. And your program's been going on and you're getting all this good data back and you can see that things are working and you're hitting the goals and outcomes that you wanted. But sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you really need to be able to shout and tell the story of what's been happening. This might be to get other people interested, to share the learning, again, to lobby other organisations or the government to take on your findings, to change things. There'll be many, many different reasons why you need to get the message spread more widely, but it's very, very, very rare that you want to keep all this information to yourself. Obviously, we're always moving towards being more open. Again, Michael's sort of reflections on the IVAR principles at the beginning, a key element of that is being open. It's about sharing. So it's really, really important that we don't just think of this monitoring and this data collection as being done for the sake of it, but we understand how that can then help us move to the next step, help improve society as a whole, whether, as I say, that's through sharing lessons or sharing the impacts. And just before I go on here, just to note, we can share the bad things as well. It's useful to tell everybody else, we tried this doesn't work, avoid it, so that we're not still kind of putting money towards things that we know don't work. So don't just think that every data story's got to be positive. Obviously, you can put a spin on things which says this didn't work, but here's the learning that we've got and here's what we should be doing moving forwards. And it is just a kind of a note there, a bit of a plea almost. Don't hide the bad. If we know the bad, we can make much more informed decisions as a sort of group moving forwards. So how do we use data and stories to communicate impacts then? So there's kind of 4 key steps within this. So you're collecting your raw qualitative and quantitative data. We've sort of gone through that. You're going to analyze and synthesize the data. I'll go through that in a little second. And then you're going to start crafting stories and creating visualizations. Stories tend not to just be a written narrative. They do tend to have some sort of visual. It could even be something like this slide we've got here. You know, this has taken us on a journey. This is kind of showing we've gone from being quite small, just thinking about the data, to being much broader and thinking about that wider purpose. And then your final stage is going to be communicating and sharing stories, but again, with a purpose. It's not just, isn't this nice? It's thinking about who your audiences might be and what those kind of relevant messages look like. So, analysing and synthesising. There's 3 key principles that we'd always push people to sort of consider when analysing. And this is particularly the case where you do have that mixture of both your quantitative monitoring data and your qualitative sort of engagement human data, whatever you want to call it. So first of all is being very structured about it. You've got your intended outcomes, your outputs, your impacts. You might have a theory of change. You might have very specific KPIs, and you just want to map your data onto that. What did you set out to do? Have you done it? You might want to break it down by different demographic groups. So, you know, we set out to get this many people into work. Okay, we hit the number overall, but actually 80% were women and only 20% were men. So we need to understand that maybe it's not worked as well for everybody. So you might want to dive down, but fundamentally this is structured. You can make a framework very simply and that you would have your different outcomes. It's kind of one side, and then you can plot it along demographic groups or plot it along different funding organisations, fundies, or whatever it might be. But you want to have that almost as a framework. An Excel is a framework effectively, anything that's sort of table based, and you can be really, really, really structured. That's great because that tells you, have you done things, yes or no, and it will still give you a bit of the insight into how you've done it as well. What you also want to do, and this is particularly the case when it's something that's quite new and innovative, anything that's been piloted, anything where the evidence base is quite limited, is do an open and thematic review as well. Basically, read your data with an open mind. Don't think about that structure. Don't think about what you set out to do. Think about what it's telling you. So does the data say, well, actually, we were trying to do an employability thing and we hadn't once considered about education, but actually, while not many people have got into a job, loads of people have taken it on themselves to go to further education or adult education. That might not have been your intended outcome, but if that's what the data is saying, well, then that goes to you either the fund's not working as we intended and we need to tweak things so that we hit those initial outcomes, or the fund's not working as intended, but it's still working really, really well. So maybe we just need to frame how we talk about it, and that changes some of the story behind it and might change your monitoring data for the next year. So it's just thinking really about the unintended themes that emerge. And then also what you need to be doing is bringing your different qualitative and quantitative data together. So you might have monitoring data telling you one thing, and it may well be the case that when you've spoken to people, they really back that up. They just give more insight and more depth. It could be the case that your monitoring data is saying something that when you speak to people, they're saying the opposite. That doesn't mean any data set is wrong. What that means is that the monitoring data has not had maybe not being granular enough, or maybe it's missed out a question, so it's not quite getting what's there. So again, if you look at both sets together, rather than just going, survey said this and people said this, but go, ooh, together the survey and the people say something a little bit different, you'll get a really, really, really good insight into what's working, how it's working, and again, how you can sort of improve things moving forwards. The next step then is to craft some stories. So you've got your findings, you've got your sort of analysis and your insights, and now it's thinking, well, how can I present these in a way that makes sense? Stories are powerful for many, many reasons. There are lots of clever psychologists that have done sort of user research into the value of stories. And just as a brief sort of summary, there's kind of 4 key points. It makes data more accessible and relatable. Not everybody understands statistical data. Not everybody understands qualitative data. Putting it in a way that speaks to your audience is really, really useful. It makes them more relatable as well. Some people just don't like numbers, and if they see a number, will switch off. But if you can kind of craft things in a story, they might be much more willing to hang around. It's more memorable than just data, and this is particularly important if you're trying to make change. If people remember things, they're much more likely to act on it. It also can lead to emotional responses, and again, that means people are more likely to act. You often need a balance. Some people are very analytical, and without the hard number, they can discount the emotion. So it's having that balance of 50% of people said this, and here's the narrative behind it, and here's why it matters. As I said, it supports actionable changes because people can really understand the change difference they could make. And people just like stories. It's just a nice thing. You know, we watch TV, we watch stories on TV, we listen to podcasts, we read books, whatever it might be, whatever format is your favorite. There's no right or wrong way, but people just like to have a little story, and it's just nicer to maybe listen to than a standard impact report that could be sort of 20, 50 pages of data. So there's always 4 key stages to crafting a story then. And this, for anyone that's ever written a narrative, will be quite familiar. You've got your characters, you've got the who. This could be more cases. Doesn't have to be people as such, but it's very much who's the story about. You do need to be careful around issues of anonymity. You might want to sort of go, okay, 5 or 6 people had a similar journey, so let's kind of merge them into one person and take away some of the identifying sort of demographic elements. But fundamentally, what you're doing there is, what are the main characters? Who are the people that we want to speak about? And can we sort of give a bit of flavour to them and flesh them out as a character people are engaged in? It's then thinking about the set and the scene, so your where and your when. This could be very specifically in a geographical area. This could be thinking that there's rural and urban differences, whatever it might be. It can be thinking about the setting of intervention. So is it a healthcare setting? Is it something else? Is it the voluntary sector? But again, it's just being clear, what is the set and the scene? What is the context? A number without that kind of context around it becomes quite meaningless. So it's given meaning to that data. It's then being quite clear about what happened. How did what you funded change things? And this is where you want to bring together both your numbers and your quotes. So 50% of people did this, and here's a really nice, compelling quote from somebody that really sort of drives that message home. There's probably going to be some images in there as well. Like I say, you know, we've got a nice image there, we've got things here, we've got this journey. Journeys can often be a good way to tell a story, but it's just kind of trying to plot that what happened in a way that's quite structured and makes sense. And then the final bit is the resolution. It's the what next. So you don't just want to end on this is what we did. You want to always bring it back to, and this is what we could be doing more of, or this is what other people could do, or this is what this means. And again, just making sure that it's got that sort of forward pushing element. So we're not just kind of being quite static with the story as well. And then the final element of what you want to do is communicate and share. And this is probably the toughest bit. It might seem difficult to write the story, but as soon as you've done the analysis, that will fall out a little bit. You'll understand what it is that you want, that you can say. But actually, when you start thinking about how you want to say it, that's when it becomes a little bit more difficult. So you need to think about the format, and there's so many different ways we can tell stories. You can have it on your web page, social media, it might be posts, videos, exhibits. You can do gallery showings of kind of findings from funding opportunities. You can do stage shows. There's organisations in the Northeast that get people that have sort of been recipients of funding together to develop a stage show about their impacts and then invite all of the sort of movers and shakers in the region around. And again, it draws on the emotional response. There might be sort of in-depth monologues and things like that. And it can lead to additional fundraising or additional action in these spaces. It's thinking about the audience, and that again will determine the format. And again, there might be multiple formats. You may well want to tell the same story in 6 different ways. And this might be because you've got 6 different audiences. This is, are people decision makers? Are people other potential organisations that you want to apply for your funding moving forwards? Is it other funders that you want to be influencing? Is it academics that you want to change so they're doing more research into an area? Whatever it might be, who is the audience? Who is it that you want to sort of make a change? And then you want to make quite a structured communication plan, because if you're going to have multiple audiences and you're going to have multiple formats, it's going to get very, very messy very soon unless you've got quite a structured, almost Gantt chart going. Here's when I need to send it to these people. Okay, they've got a conference there. If I turn up, I can show my video at this thing and I've got a wider audience. And it's really just being quite specific and dedicated. That probably means a bit of desk research to map out who are the potential audiences, what are they doing, are there events, are there newsletters, whatever it might be, how do they usually learn, and how can you come into their learning. So again, we work a lot with violence reduction units. They have a sort of monthly learning session. If we do something interesting, that's where we're trying to get in front of, because then that can be spread out to all of the units across the UK in one relatively sort of short session. If we try to do that individually, we'd be talking to 22 different people and trying to match in with their own sort of local timings, which is obviously a lot more time consuming. So it's just being quite sort of considered and structured with that. And then very finally, we just wanted to come on to process learning as well, and then we'll have sort of about 7 or 8 minutes for questions at the end. So if you have got any, please do drop them in chat. But process learning is not in any way, shape or form separate to the other parts of evaluation, and that it should always be done, but it probably doesn't come into your story in the same way. And this probably is a little bit more for your internal learning, or that you want to share it in slightly different ways that's a bit less story-led and a bit more sort of community and engagement based. And that's why we're just going to speak about communities of practice and action learning as 2 key elements. So communities of practice, if you're not aware, is basically getting a group of people that are all involved in the practice of something. So they would usually be your delivery partners. Or community of learning could be much broader, and that could be anyone that's really got interest. So that could be actual beneficiaries, that could be fund holders, that could be internal stakeholders, that could be external experts and people in the system as well. And effectively what you do, depending on which approach you do, it will both be the same, but what you're getting people together on an ongoing and regular basis. You can just do it at the end and you can all look back, but people forget what went wrong, people forget what went right, people forget how frustrated they were at certain times, or some of the tricks and tips that they've done to overcome challenges. So where you can do this on an ongoing, regular basis, you tend to get a much, much stronger level of learning. You need to encourage openness, sharing and debate. You need to let people have the ability to say, this doesn't work and I don't like it, and can we please change it? That might mean that as the funder, you're not always in the room, and maybe you get somebody that's a little bit more sort of external to kind of facilitate this, or you nominate a sort of roving chair of the delivery partners and they can sort of feedback on a group basis. It could be the case that they desperately want the funder there and they want the opportunity to kind of raise challenges. And if you've created that open sort of approach, then they're much more likely to want you in the room. It's about creating opportunities for immediate changes and enabling that flexibility that the IVAR principles say. So if things are working badly, if you funded 20 organisations and 16 are going, this monitoring form doesn't work, it's ruining our lives, we can't collect the data. It's about, as the funder, going, right, okay, this is feedback, we need to listen to this, what can we do to address it and make things different? And it is being just sort of responsive to what's coming out that continues that trust with people, but also it's going to sort of strengthen the overall data and outcomes that you get. It's also about collating wider learning to feed into both ongoing learning. So the people in the room, they will hear from somebody else and take things away, and that'll influence their own delivery and mean that they're going to be more likely to hit the outcomes that were intended. But fundamentally, if you do look back at all of the process learning that you do at the end, you can then feed that into the next iteration and sort of continuously improve things as you go. And then I think what's also important, and increasingly what we're seeing is funders don't just want to fund an intervention, but they also do want to improve local systems and bring people closer together and reduce duplication and increase collaboration, develop sort of networked and sort of more engaging ways of working with partners. And actually, just by getting delivery members or wider stakeholders or beneficiaries in a room, you're doing that, and you're doing some of the work that may itself be part of the outcome. So actually, process learning can have some real clear benefits to wider systems that itself might be important for your evaluation. And these are the 4 questions we'd always recommend asking. What has worked well? What has not worked well? What have you learned? And what have you changed? And you can ask these once every 6 weeks, once every quarter, and you will get different answers each time. And you will be able to see that kind of development of an approach of learning as you go on. There are different tools you can use. You can have stakeholder-specific focus groups or sort of workshops where people are in a group together and sort of share. For this type of thing, focus groups do tend to be the best way because people bounce off each other and learn immediately. But we'd always recommend that you still have that sort of one-to-one interview with each fund holder. Maybe that will be less frequently, maybe just once throughout a funding cycle. But just because sometimes people don't feel comfortable sharing negative things, or there may be negative things about people in the room that they obviously don't want to share to their face. You can use tools such as RAG ratings and maturity matrices to have kind of immediate sort of check-ins, or you can do online lightning surveys, which would basically be where you send out these 4 questions and then analyze them. And when you meet, you can go through them all and sort of like almost reflect back what the whole group has said. Or you might want to do a little pulse survey, as we're going to send you out at the end on the Mentimeter, just to get that sort of immediate feedback as well. So many different ways you can go about this, but as Michael said at the beginning, we really do recommend that it's kind of considered as being key and central. And I'll pass back over to Michael for the last minute or 2.
Thanks, Maddie. There's a lot there. Okay, so this is our grant making cycle, and some of you may have seen this from earlier sessions. Evaluation and learning is on the bottom left, and what we're trying to demonstrate here is that it's not like an end of a process, but it's actually going in a circle. So the idea is that the evidence and the learning that's been gathered through all of these different tools and methods will help really to guide and position, the what next, which should be like through a redesign of either the program that's being run, or it could be something that perhaps is a new pilot, that's something new that comes about. So the idea is that by going through this process, you can look back at what you've done and start feeding it back into understanding again, what is that landscape, what is the space that other funders are playing, and what is all this learning, and start then thinking again about that redesign and what does a new program look like. So again, we just wanted to share all of this, and that these are really the steps of a successful program, and this is a very important part.